All right, welcome to our second loop, the for loop. Goal for this next part is to be able to repeat commands using the for loop. Quick summary, loop is just code that repeats, so code that we want to run over and over again. That's called a loop. And there's two types. Generally, there's two types. A while loop, which is used when you're unsure of how many times the code will loop. So again, think of a user logging into a program. We might have to keep looping until they enter the correct password, but we don't know how many times that's going to take. So we'd use a while loop while they have not correctly entered the password, prompt them to ask the password, keep going. For loop is when you generally know how many times the code is going to repeat. So imagine if we had a bunch of little images on a screen, say some monsters, and there were 6 of them, and we wanted to move all the monsters 2 steps to the right or something, then we could loop through all 6 monsters and move them 2 spaces to the right. Okay, so you use a for loop when you know how many times the code is going to repeat. And that's our goal today, is to figure out how to use for loops. Okay, so looking at this, you probably don't need to write a lot of this stuff down. Just go through the examples, and I'll have you enter some answers here in a little bit. But a for loop looks like this in Java, and it's kind of goofy. You have the word for, and then you have 3 different parts. So you have like initial condition, which is going to run only one time. Usually you set a variable to like a certain initial amount, like maybe set it to be 0, and then you do a condition. So maybe we start at x is 0, and while x is less than 5, we're going to keep looping. And then this is how we change x. The increment is how we change it. So we could have x increase by 1, increase by 2, decrease by 5, whatever it is. And then we run these statements for however many times is commanded by the loop. All right, so maybe just a quick example of this would be, we could do for, and then you'll declare an int variable. You're actually making a new variable x, and we're going to set it be whatever we want, say 1. And we want to keep going while, let's just say, x is less than 5 or something like that. And then each time we're going to increase x by 1. Okay, and then we could, whatever we put inside these brackets here, that's what will run however many times. So this loop, I think, actually will run when x is, well, we could make a little chart here to kind of figure it out. So we could do x will start off at 1, and then it'll increase by 1 while we're still less than 5. Okay, so once we hit 5, it won't run anymore because this says be less than 5. So x would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So this little loop here would run 4 times and do whatever statements we have in here 4 times over. All right, so that's kind of the idea of a for loop. Okay, one more example here. We're going to print some perfect squares. And so a lot of times when you break these loops down, I kind of like to think of what are the values that I is going to take on. And then we could also say, well, when I is this value, what actually gets printed? So you can see in our initial condition up here, I gets set to be 1. And we keep going while I is less than or equal to 4. And each time we increase I by 1. So I starts off as 1. And then it just increases by 1. And it keeps going as long as we're less than or equal to 4. So once it hits 5, it'll break and this code will not run. So the last time it'll run will be I of 4. And what'll get printed is just I times I. So it would be 1, 4, 9, 16. So this little loop here would print out 1, 4, 9, 16. Print out the perfect squares, first 4. All right, the rest of this video is just going to be analyzing some for loops. So before you learn to write them, I think it's good to try and read what a for loop does. So here's a for loop for you, and you just have to figure out what is printed. All right, there's no print out line, it's just the number with a space. So what do you think would get printed in this case? Okay, back with you. Hopefully you figured out that this will print I of 0, and we'll keep going, increasing by 1 as long as we're less than 3. So it goes 0, 1, 2, and then stop. So just print out 0, 1, 2. All right, next one for you. This is a little different. K is starting off at 10. We go while k is greater than 0, and we decrease k. So what is going to be printed to the screen this time? Hopefully you figured out the first time through we were going to print a 10 with a space. decrease by 1, so next time will be 9, then 8, then 7 with a space, and we'll keep going, and we should do 1 will be the last number we print, because once we hit 0, k will no longer be greater than 0, so if we run this, it prints all the way down to 1. Next loop, again, slightly different. I'm just going to see if you can interpret it, read it, give it your best shot. J starts off at 1, and we increase by 2 each time. So that's what's different here is increasing by 2. And we have to stay less than 10. So J would go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Once it hits 11, it will break this case. And so the last number that will be printed is 9. So it's just increasing by 2 here. That's the difference. All right, we're getting really crazy now. This one, again, we start off at 1, we're going less than 100, but we have some weird thing where D is becoming what D was before times 2. So kind of a crazy one, but list them out and see if you can figure out what happens here. So these should just start at 1, and then each time D is going to be whatever it was previously times 2. So it'll go 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. Then once it hits 128, it'll be no longer less than 100, and so it'll stop at 64. So as expected, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. Right? And kind of the fun part of these loops is you can make them print all sorts of crazy things. If you make this bigger, it's going to loop for a while and print out a whole bunch of stuff. So that's kind of the fun part of loops is you can do a lot of code in just a small amount of space. Final two examples here are going to involve strings. And so loops with strings get a little bit goofy here, but we're going to kind of loop through the letters one at a time using char at. And that's what's going on here. So it's kind of tricky, but I starts off at whatever the length is minus 1. And we keep going while I is greater than or equal to 0. And we're going to go minus minus I each time. So just as a help here, I made a little grid here of Bieber. So I would recommend doing this kind of Bieber grid and then use that to help try and interpret what this code is doing. Okay, so it's kind of a tricky code thing, but see if you can make the grid and figure out what is going to be displayed here. Okay, back with you. So we start off, the length of Bieber would be 6, and if we go one less than that, we would be in position 5. So I is going to start off, so if we make a little chart here, honestly, this might be a good way to do this. I starts off at 5 and decreases by 1 each time. And it keeps going as long as we're greater than or equal to 0. So the last one will be 0 before we stop. And each time it gets the char at that position, so we go position 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and then prints it with a space, right? So I believe it'll print the 5th position first, so that'd be the R. Then it'll get the char at 4, that'll be the E. 3 would be this B. So you can see it'll end up printing it backwards with spaces. So if I run this, it just prints Bieber backwards with spaces. Okay, one more example involving a string in a loop. Pretty complex code, but maybe we can break it down a little bit. Start off by declaring a string variable, set it equal to parabola. Again, I would recommend making the grid. So here's a parabola grid. It's got length 8 and has from 0 to 7 index positions. So we're going to start off at 0 and go while we're less than the length, again, which is 8. So while I is less than 8, we do plus plus I. We get the char at the ith position, and then we do a check, and then we do a printout here. So your job is to interpret what this code means. Okay, so hopefully you can see that this is just counting the vowels. And just to be clear again, I is going to start off at 0 and just go up by 1, which is going to go through all the positions and up to 7, right? So the length is 8, and so as long as we say less than the length, we'll go 0 to 7, which is what we want, because parabola has positions 0 to 7. Its length is 8, but its positions are 0 to 7. Okay, and then it'll just get that char, see if it's a vowel, see if it's one of the vowels. If it is, add to that count, and then display the number of vowels. So I think parabola has 1, 2, 3, 4 vowels. So if we coded this right, we will get 4 at the end there because it counts the vowels and gives you 4 to return. right? And that's just an example of using a for loop with a string. So starting to get a little complex. Thank you for watching.